Ethan thought he was just going home after a long shift until he saw her, soaked, limping, and full of fear. He could have kept driving, but stopping changed everything. What she told him moments later would shatter his world and put both their lives at risk. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The rain poured mercilessly from the darkened sky, each drop hammering against the windshield of Ethan Miller's truck as he drove along the deserted highway. The wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge, and visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Ethan squinted through the glass, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He was regretting his decision to take the back roads home from his late shift at the hospital. Should have just stayed in town, he muttered to himself, leaning forward to get a better view of the road ahead. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the countryside around him. That's when he saw her hunched figure limping along the side of the road, one arm wrapped protectively around her middle, the other raised in a futile attempt to shield herself from the downpour. Ethan hit the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the wet asphalt before coming to a stop. He hesitated for a moment, the warnings about picking up strangers flashing through his mind. But his medical training and basic human decency won out. He couldn't leave someone in this storm, especially someone who was clearly injured. He rolled down the passenger window just enough to call out, "Hey, do you need help?" The woman turned toward him, her face briefly visible in the glow of his headlights. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with rain-soaked dark hair plastered to her pale face. Even through the rain, Ethan could see the fear in her eyes. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I need to get away from here." Something in her tone raised alarms in Ethan's mind. This wasn't just someone caught in bad weather. This woman was running from something or someone. "Get in," he said. Unlocking the door, she limped to the passenger side and pulled herself in with visible effort, wincing as she settled into the seat. Up close, Ethan could see a nasty bruise forming on her cheekbone, and the way she held herself suggested injuries that weren't immediately visible. "I'm Ethan," he said, turning the heat up. "I'm a nurse at Riverdale Memorial. Can I ask your name?" She hesitated, droplets of water running down her face. For a moment, Ethan couldn't tell if they were raindrops or tears. "Sarah," she finally answered, though something in her delivery made Ethan wonder if that was her real name. "Okay, Sarah. You're hurt. I should take you to the hospital." "No." The force of her response startled him. "No hospitals. They'll find me there." "Who will find you?" Ethan asked, concern deepening. Sarah's eyes darted to the side mirrors, scanning the road behind them. "My family," she whispered. They think I'm dead. And they want to make sure of it." A chill ran down Ethan's spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain. He had seen cases of domestic abuse during his shifts at the EA, but the raw fear in Sarah's voice suggested something even more sinister. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. "I found out something I wasn't supposed to know. About the family business. When I threatened to go to the authorities, my own brother—" Her voice broke. "He took me out to the woods. He had a gun. But I managed to run when he was distracted by a phone call. I've been walking for hours." Ethan processed this information, trying to decide what to do. Every medical and ethical instinct told him to take her to the hospital, but her terror seemed genuine. "Look, I have a cabin about 30 minutes from here," he said after a moment of consideration. "It's isolated, hard to find if you don't know where to look. We can go there, get you warm and dry, and figure out what to do next. I have enough medical supplies there to at least check you over." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know what this means." As Ethan pulled back onto the road, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just become involved in something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. but there was no turning back now. "Try to rest," he told her. "You're safe for the moment." Sarah leaned her head against the window, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "No one's safe," she murmured, almost too quietly for Ethan to hear. "Not when the Bryce family wants you dead." The name struck a chord in Ethan's memory. The Bryce family owned half the businesses in the county, including a large pharmaceutical company. They were powerful, wealthy, and, if local rumors were to be believed, not entirely scrupulous in their business dealings. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the rain continued to pour. Whatever he had gotten himself into, he was committed now. He couldn't abandon someone in need, especially not someone running for their life. As they drove deeper into the storm, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if his act of kindness would be the beginning of a nightmare for them both. Yet something told him that this encounter was no accident, that fate had placed Sarah in his path for a reason. And despite the danger, he knew he couldn't have driven past her even if he'd known what was to come. For now, all that mattered was getting to safety. The questions, the explanations, the decisions, all of that could wait until they were out of the storm. But as lightning split the sky once more, illuminating Sarah's haunted profile, Ethan knew that some storms weren't so easily escaped. The cabin stood like a sentinel in the clearing, a modest structure of weathered wood and stone that Ethan had inherited from his grandfather. As he helped Sarah up the 3 wooden steps to the porch, he could feel her trembling beneath his steadying hand, whether from cold, pain, or fear, he couldn't tell. Probably all 3. "It's not much," Ethan said as he unlocked the door, "but it's warm and secure." Sarah didn't respond, her eyes continuously scanning the tree line, as if expecting shadows to materialize from the darkness. Once inside, Ethan quickly set about building a fire in the stone hearth, while Sarah stood awkwardly in the center of the main room, arms still wrapped protectively around herself. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Ethan said, trying to keep his tone professional. "I have some spare clothes in the bedroom that might fit you. They'll be too big, but they're dry." Sarah nodded silently and followed his directions to the small bedroom. When she emerged several minutes later, she was wearing an oversized flannel shirt and sweatpants, the cuffs rolled up multiple times. The borrowed clothes seemed to swallow her thin frame. "Come sit by the fire," Ethan urged. "I need to check your injuries." As a nurse, Ethan had developed a clinical detachment when examining patients, but there was something different about tending to Sarah's wounds in the intimate setting of his cabin. The bruising was extensive, not just the visible mark on her face, but dark patterns across her ribs and back that told a story of calculated violence. "3 ribs are probably bruised, but I don't think they're broken," he said, gentle fingers probing her side. "And your ankle is sprained, not fractured. You're lucky." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Lucky," she repeated, the word hollow. Ethan wrapped her ankle with an elastic bandage from his medical kit. "I know it doesn't feel that way now, but it could have been worse. Much worse." "It still might be," Sarah said quietly. "You don't know my family." "Then tell me," Ethan said, settling into the chair opposite her. "Who exactly are the Bryces, beyond what everyone in town knows, and what did you discover that made them want to kill you?" Sarah stared into the dancing flames, her expression distant. "The Bryce family has been in this county for 5 generations. On the surface, they're respectable business owners, philanthropists even, but underneath ... double quote, she swallowed hard. "The pharmaceutical company is just a front. The real money comes from manufacturing and distributing illegal synthetic drugs. My father and uncle have been doing it for decades. And you found proof of this?" Ethan asked, his mind racing with the implications. Sarah nodded. "I worked in the company's accounting department. I started noticing discrepancies, money moving through shell companies. I thought it was just tax evasion at first. But then I found files, records of chemical purchases that had nothing to do with our legitimate products. "Why didn't you go straight to the police?" Ethan asked. Sarah's eyes met his, and the raw pain there made him flinch. "Because my brother Marcus is the county sheriff," she said. "And my cousin heads the state police division in this region. There's nowhere I could report this locally without word getting back to the family." The pieces were falling into place for Ethan. The Bryce family's influence in the area was well known, but he had never imagined it extended to such systemic corruption. "I confronted my father," Sarah continued, her voice growing distant as if recounting a nightmare. "I was naive enough to think he might want out, that he might be trapped in something he'd inherited from his own father. I thought ... double quotes, she trailed off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. He called my brother, and that same night Marcus took me for a drive. Said we needed to discuss family matters somewhere private. Ethan felt sick imagining the scene, and he tried to kill you. He said he was sorry, that it wasn't personal. That family loyalty had to come first." A single tear tracked down Sarah's cheek. "My own brother was going to put a bullet in my head and leave me in the woods. The only reason I'm alive is because he got a call something about a shipment coming in. He was distracted enough that I managed to run." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. Ethan tried to process everything Sarah had told him, the enormity of the situation sinking in. She wasn't just running from an abusive family, she was running from a criminal organization with tentacles throughout local law enforcement. "We need to get you to federal authorities," Ethan finally said. "FBI, D someone outside the local power structure." Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand. The family has connections everywhere. Politicians, judges, even some federal agents. My grandfather used to brag about it. We can't trust anyone without knowing for sure they're clean. Then what's your plan?" Ethan asked, frustration edging into his voice. "You can't run forever." "I have evidence," Sarah said, her hand unconsciously moving to the pocket of the borrowed sweatpants. "A flash drive with financial records, emails, photos of the labs. I was trying to make my way to a friend in Chicago. She's a journalist. If we can get this information public, widespread enough that it can't be contained." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the full weight of his involvement settling on his shoulders. By helping Sarah, he had made himself a target too. If the Bryce family was as powerful and ruthless as she described, they would stop at nothing to silence her, and anyone who assisted her. "We'll leave at first light," he decided. "My truck is recognizable in town, but I have an old car in the shed out back. It's not much to look at, but it runs. We can take back roads, avoid main highways." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "We? You don't have to come with me. You've done enough already." "I can't ask you to risk your life." "You didn't ask," Ethan interrupted. "I'm offering. Besides, with that ankle, you won't get far on your own, and ... He hesitated, then added, "I know what it's like to stand alone against something bigger than yourself. I won't let you face that." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Two people who, despite the risks, couldn't turn away from what they knew was right. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, the simple words carrying the weight of a life debt. Outside, the storm continued to rage, branches scraping against the cabin walls like skeletal fingers seeking entry. But inside, by the warmth of the fire, a fragile alliance had formed, one that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. Dawn broke with reluctant fingers of light, pushing through the lingering storm clouds. Ethan had spent most of the night alternating between keeping watch by the window and checking on Sarah, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion on his bed. He himself had managed only a few restless hours of sleep in the armchair, his dreams haunted by shadowy figures moving through the trees outside. Now, as he loaded supplies into the trunk of the old Buick he kept at the cabin, emergency food, water, a first aid kit, and the few $100s in cash he kept hidden in a coffee can. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He scanned the tree line repeatedly, but the forest remained still and silent in the gray morning light. Sarah emerged from the cabin, moving gingerly on her wrapped ankle, but looking marginally better after a night's rest. The borrowed clothes still engulfed her frame, but she had rolled and pinned them to fit better, and had pulled her damp hair back into a practical ponytail. In her hand, she clutched a small flash drive, the evidence that had nearly cost her her life. "We should get moving," she said, her voice low despite the isolation of the cabin. "They'll be looking for me, for us." Ethan nodded, helping her into the passenger seat before sliding behind the wheel. The old Buick's engine coughed twice before catching, the sound unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. "I know back roads that will get us to Interstate 70 without going through town," Ethan said as they pulled away from the cabin. "From there, we can head east toward Pittsburgh, then north to Chicago. If we drive straight through, switching drivers, we could make it by tonight." Sarah twisted in her seat to look back at the disappearing cabin. "Your family won't report the car missing?" Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "No family to report it. My grandfather left me the cabin and the car. Parents died when I was in college. No siblings." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "Though right now, that might be a blessing. No one for them to threaten or use against you." The implication that the Bryce family would target his loved ones sent a chill through Ethan. "What about your mother?" he asked. "Is she part of all this too?" Sarah's expression darkened. "My mother died when I was 15. Official cause was a fall down the stairs after drinking. But I always suspected." She trailed off, then shook her head. She had started asking questions about the business, about where the money really came from. 3 weeks later, she was dead. The car fell silent as they navigated the narrow dirt roads that wound through the forest. Ethan focused on driving, avoiding the worst of the mud puddles left by the night's storm. Sarah kept her eyes on the side mirrors, watching for any sign of pursuit. "Tell me more about this journalist friend," Ethan said eventually, needing to break the tense silence. "Madeline Ellis. We were roommates in college," Sarah explained. "She works for the Tribune now. She's done exposes on corporate corruption before. She knows how to handle this, how to protect the information and get it to the right people." "And you trust her completely?" Ethan pressed. "You're sure she's not connected to your family in any way?" "She's the only person I'm absolutely certain I can trust," Sarah affirmed. "She's from Seattle originally, no ties to this region at all. And she hates everything the Bryce family stands for." They had been driving for nearly an hour, the dirt roads giving way to paved county routes, when Sarah suddenly stiffened in her seat. "That truck," she said, her voice tight with fear. "The black one that just turned onto the road behind us. I recognize it. It's my cousin David's." Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. The black pickup was about a quarter-mile behind them, moving at a casual pace. "Are you sure? It could be any truck. It has a custom grill guard, see it? And that dent in the passenger door? It's his. They found us." Her breathing had accelerated, panic edging into her voice. "They might not have spotted us yet," Ethan said, fighting to keep his own voice calm. "This road connects to the highway in about 3 miles. We'll turn off before then, take an even more roundabout route." He made a sharp turn onto a smaller side road, hoping to lose their potential pursuer. For a few minutes it seemed to have worked. The black truck was no longer visible in their mirrors. But as they rounded a bend, Ethan's heart sank. The truck was there, parked sideways across the narrow road, blocking their path completely. A man in a sheriff's uniform stood beside it, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Marcus," Sarah breathed, the single word laden with dread. Ethan slammed on the brakes, the Buick skidding slightly on the damp asphalt. They were still. 100 yards from the roadblock, just far enough to have options. Is there another way out? Sarah asked desperately. Ethan scanned their surroundings. To the left was dense forest. To the right, a steep embankment leading down to a small river, swollen from the night's rain. No, he admitted. Not in the car. The uniformed figure, Sarah's brother, the county sheriff, had spotted them now. He raised one hand in a casual wave, as if greeting old friends, and began walking toward their vehicle. What do we do? Sarah's voice had dropped to a whisper, her hand clutching the flash drive so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Ethan made a split-second decision. We run, he said, shifting the car into reverse. When I say so, open your door and head for the trees. Stay low, move as fast as you can with that ankle. I'll be right behind you. He began backing the car up slowly, buying them precious seconds to prepare. Marcus Bryce quickened his pace, his casual demeanor dropping away as he realized they weren't going to surrender easily. Now, Ethan hissed. They flung their doors open simultaneously, Sarah darting toward the tree line with surprising speed. Despite her injury, Ethan paused just long enough to grab the keys from the ignition, no sense making it easy for their pursuers to follow them. Stop right there. Marcus Bryce's authoritative voice rang out. Sarah, this is pointless. You know you can't run from us. Ethan reached the edge of the forest just as the first gunshot cracked through the air. He didn't look back to see if Marcus was firing warning shots or aiming to kill. He just ran, pushing deeper into the trees, following the glimpses of Sarah's flannel shirt ahead of him. The forest was their only chance now, to lose themselves in its depths and somehow find another way to safety. But as the sounds of pursuit grew behind them, multiple voices now. Not just Marcus. Ethan knew the odds were stacking heavily against them. Sarah stumbled on a tree root, crying out as she wrenched her injured ankle. Ethan caught up to her, pulling her to her feet and supporting her weight against his side. We can't outrun them, she gasped, pain etched across her features. Not like this. Ethan scanned their surroundings frantically, looking for any advantage, any hiding place. His eyes fell on the rushing water of the river below the embankment. The river, he said. It's our only chance. They'll expect us to keep running through the forest. Sarah followed his gaze, understanding dawning in her eyes. It's dangerous. The current, more dangerous than staying here. Ethan countered. Another gunshot sounded. Closer this time, splintering bark from a tree just yards away from them. The decision was made for them. Come on, Ethan urged, helping Sarah toward the embankment. Stay close to me. Whatever happens, don't let go. As they half slid, half tumbled down toward the churning water, Ethan sent up a silent prayer, not just for their survival, but for the strength to see this through. They were beyond the point of no return now, committed to a path that would either lead them to justice or to destruction. And somewhere in the back of his mind, as the cold water rushed up to meet them, Ethan wondered if he would ever see his quiet, peaceful life again, or if, like Sarah, he had now been marked for death by the Bryce family's implacable vengeance. The river seized them with cold, hungry hands, instantly soaking them to the bone and pulling them into its churning current. Ethan managed to keep his grip on Sarah, one arm locked firmly around her waist as they were swept downstream. The icy water stole his breath, but he fought against the panic rising in his chest. They needed to get to the opposite bank, away from their pursuers, but not so far downstream that they'd be spotted from the road. Kick with me, he shouted over the roar of the water, toward that fallen tree. About 50 yards downstream, a massive oak had toppled across the river, its tangled roots still clinging to the far bank. It created a natural bridge and a dangerous obstacle if they hit it wrong. Sarah nodded her understanding, her teeth chattering as she struggled to swim with her injured ankle. Together, they angled their bodies toward the shore, fighting against the current that seemed determined to keep them in its grip. Ethan's muscles burned with the effort, but inch by inch, they made progress. When they reached the fallen tree, he grabbed onto a branch, the rough bark scraping his palms as he pulled them both toward the trunk. "Climb up," he urged Sarah, boosting her onto the horizontal trunk. She dragged herself along it, collapsing onto the opposite bank as Ethan hauled himself up behind her. For a moment, they simply lay there on the muddy shore, gasping for breath, bodies trembling from cold and adrenaline. In the distance, they could hear shouts as their pursuers reached the spot where they had entered the water. "They'll figure it out soon," Sarah whispered, pushing herself up to a sitting position. Her hand went instinctively to her pocket, checking for the flash drive. Relief washed over her face when she found it still there, secured in the zippered pocket of Ethan's sweatpants. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, standing on shaky legs and helping Sarah to her feet. "There's an old hunting cabin about 2 miles from here. A patient of mine uses it. He gave me the location in case I ever wanted to go fishing. It's not much, but it might have some supplies we can use." They set off through the woods, moving as quickly as Sarah's injured ankle would allow. The forest was quiet except for the occasional call of a bird and the constant drip of water from the sodden canopy above. Ethan kept them on a course parallel to the river, using it as a guide, while staying far enough away to avoid being spotted from the opposite bank. "Do you think they'll cross the river?" Sarah asked, her voice low. "Eventually," Ethan replied, "but it will take time. There's no bridge for at least 5 miles in either direction, and the current's too strong to cross safely where we did. They'll either have to find another spot or get vehicles to the nearest bridge. That gives us a few hours at most," Sarah said grimly. They trudged on in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Ethan's mind raced through scenarios, trying to formulate a plan that would get them to safety. Their original route to Chicago was compromised now. Marcus and his men would be watching all the main roads out of the county. The hunting cabin appeared before them suddenly, a small, weathered structure nestled among the pines. It was little more than a glorified shed, with a single room and a tiny covered porch, but to Ethan and Sarah, it looked like salvation. The door was secured with a padlock, but Ethan knew where the key was hidden, under a fake rock beside the porch steps. Inside, the cabin was dusty but dry. A small wood stove stood in one corner, with a stack of firewood beside it. There were 2 camp cots against the wall, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with basic supplies canned. Food, matches, a first aid kit, and to Ethan's relief, a battery-powered radio. "We need to get warm and dry first," Ethan said, turning to Sarah. "Then we can figure out our next move." He busied himself starting a fire in the wood stove while Sarah searched through the supplies for dry clothing. She found a few items: an old flannel shirt, a pair of work pants that would be too big for either of them, but could be belted, and some wool socks. They took turns changing behind a moth-eaten blanket hung across one corner, modesty preserved despite their desperate circumstances. As warmth slowly returned to their bodies, Ethan tuned the radio, searching for a news station. If the Bryce family was as connected as Sarah claimed, they might use official channels to hunt them down, perhaps even issuing an PB with some fabricated story about Sarah being dangerous or unstable. "We need a new plan," Sarah said, sitting close to the wood stove, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of hot water, the closest thing to tea they could manage with the available supplies. "They know we're heading to Chicago now." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What if we don't run? What if we take the fight to them instead?" Sarah looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "What are you talking about? We can't fight the entire Bryce family. They have money, weapons, and half the law enforcement in the county on their payroll. But they don't have this," Ethan said, pointing to the flash drive that now sat on the table between them. "And they don't have what I have: connections at the hospital." I don't understand, Sarah said, her brow furrowed. Dr. Elena Rivera, Ethan explained. She's the chief of emergency medicine at Riverdale Memorial. Her brother is an FBI agent based in the regional office in Pittsburgh. She's mentioned him a few times. He works in the organized crime division. If anyone would be interested in what's on that drive, it would be him. And more importantly, if anyone would know which federal agents we can trust, it would be him. Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes for the first time since they'd fled the cabin. You think we can reach him? There's a landline at the hospital that connects directly to Dr. Rivera's office. It's a secure line used for sensitive patient information. If I can get to the hospital, I can call her from there. She can contact her brother. But how do we get to the hospital? They'll be watching it. They know you work there, Ethan smiled grimly. They'll be watching the main entrances, sure. But I know another way in through the old service tunnels. They connect the main building to the laundry facility. Most people don't even know they exist anymore. I only know because I got lost down there during my first week on the job. Sarah's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. It could work, she admitted. But we'd have to get back across the river and make it to the hospital without being seen. We wait until dark, Ethan decided. The hunting cabin's owner, Mr. Jenkins, keeps an old rowboat tied up about half a mile downstream. We can use that to cross back over. Then it's about 3 miles through the woods to reach the edge of town. If we're careful, we can make it to the hospital by midnight. As they finalized their plan, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns his life had taken in the span of just 24 hours. Yesterday, he had been a normal nurse, driving home from a routine shift. Now he was a fugitive, hunted by one of the most powerful families in the county, planning what amounted to a covert operation to expose a criminal enterprise. Yet despite the danger, despite the fear that gnawed at his insides, he felt a clarity of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Helping Sarah wasn't just about saving her life anymore. It was about exposing corruption that had poisoned their community for generations. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. You could have dropped me off somewhere, walked away. This isn't your fight. Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering her question. 3 years ago, I lost a patient, a 19-year-old kid who came in with an overdose. We couldn't save him. Later, I found out the drugs that killed him were manufactured right here in our county. High-grade, synthetic opioids that were flooding the streets. He paused, the memory still raw. If what you're saying is true, if the Bryce family is behind the drug operation in this area, then they killed that kid and countless others. So, maybe this is my fight after all. Sarah reached across the table, her fingers briefly touching his. Thank you, she said, the simple words carrying the weight of all she couldn't express. Outside, the day was beginning to fade, shadows lengthening across the forest floor. Soon, they would make their move back across the river, through the darkened woods, to the hospital where they would make their stand against the Bryce family's reign of corruption. Ethan checked the wood in the stove, adding another log to maintain the warmth for their remaining hours in the cabin. Try to rest, he told Sarah. Tonight will be challenging. As Sarah settled onto one of the cots, Ethan stood by the cabin's single window, looking out at the gathering dusk. In the distance, a crow called 3 harsh cries that echoed through the trees before silence fell once more. Whatever came next, whether they succeeded or failed, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. The woman he had found limping through a storm had changed the course of his life forever. And despite all the danger, all the fear, he couldn't bring himself to regret stopping for her on that rain-soaked road. Some choices once made defined a person. This was his.